Emotional blackmail is an abusive and manipulative game that people play. What hurts the most is it usually comes from our closest friends, family, or even relationships. Sometimes we grow up with it our whole lives and not even realize it. Have you ever been guilt-tripped? I'm sure we all have at some point. What's worse is that if you let it go unchecked, it will ruin your mental health, harm you physically, or destroy your relationships. It will take courage to change the power dynamic, but with assertiveness, self-help, and some courage, we can change that. Emotional Blackmail by Susan Forward writes from the point of view of the victims of manipulation, describing both the manipulative strategies that blackmailers deploy and the solutions that you can implement. Today I'm going to give you my best takeaways from the book and throw in my own experiences to help you better understand. Emotional blackmail, a definition. Emotional blackmail is a form of manipulation in which people close to us threaten, directly or indirectly, to punish us if we don't do what they want. The basic threat, which can be expressed in many different ways, is, if you don't behave the way I want you to, you will suffer. The closer people are to us, the more they know what they can leverage to push our buttons. The acronym for this is FOG, F-O-G. When the manipulative fog descends upon you, reality distorts, and you cannot recognize anymore what's real or manipulated, what's fair or unfair, and of course, fits perfect with its doubled meaning. FOG stands for fear, obligation, and guilt. Fear. This is you afraid to cross them, or afraid of the consequences of not submitting to do what they want. Obligation. This is when we feel like we are obligated to help, support, or consent to whatever it is they want. Blackmailers never hesitate to put our own sense of obligation to the test, emphasizing how much they've given up, how much they've done for their targets, and how much we owe them. This is sort of like my dad saying, a good son should help his father with his yard work. And finally, guilt. Guilt is normal in any empathic individual, and the blackmailer leverages it. The blackmailer seeks to make us feel guilty if we don't comply with whatever they request. When in a dysfunctional cycle of emotional blackmail, the victim may be inclined to apologize, plead, change plans to meet the other's needs, cry, use logic, give in, or challenge. Typically, they will find it difficult to stand up for themselves, directly address the issue, set boundaries, and communicate with the blackmailer that the behavior is inappropriate. They do not consistently set clear boundaries indicating what is acceptable for them. There are 4 types of emotional blackmailers. 1. Punishers. Punishers operate with a need to get their way, regardless of the feelings or needs of the other person. Their motto is, my way or the highway. Number 2. Self-punishers. They emphasize what they will do to themselves, like a girlfriend saying she'll kill herself if you break up with her. Number 3. Sufferers. This is the voice of a victim conveying guilt on the partner if they do not do what is demanded. If they don't comply, there is a suggestion that their suffering will be the other's fault. This is like someone saying, after all I've done for you, you're gonna let me suffer? Number 4. Tantalizers. They hold out a promise of something great to happen only if we do what they want. Sometimes they can frame their request as shit tests we need to get past to get to the promised land. It's like the girl who has a guy in the friend zone, thinking he'll date her one day so she makes him do everything for her. Common in any abuse cycles, it is important to understand the progression of emotional blackmail. It usually starts subtle or implicit comments and behaviors. The progression can be insidious, so one does not realize its impact until it's gotten severe. A metaphor would be of a crab in boiling water. If you place a crab immediately into boiling water, its instincts will cause it to try and jump out because of the instant pain. However, if you place a crab in lukewarm water and slowly increase the heat, it does not recognize the pain as a danger signal at the same level of heat. The crab becomes desensitized as the water is heating up slowly. The behaviors and impact of emotional blackmail can be similar, and I'm sure I don't have to tell you what ends up happening to the crab. There are 6 progressive steps identified in emotional blackmail. Number 1, demand. The manipulator will make a clear demand of what they want, tied with a threat. You need to pay my rent or I'll leave you. You need to let me move in or I'll tell your sister what you said about her. Number 2, resistance. Resistance from the victim. After the demand is identified, the victim may resist or feel the need to avoid the person because they are unsure of how to handle the demand. The concerning part of this process is it is often unsavory, unfavorable, or unreasonable demand placed on the victim. Number 3, pressure. Pressure from the manipulator. Manipulators of emotional blackmail are not concerned about pushing too hard. They will persist to get what they want no matter what it takes. Creating fear can be the driving force behind the demand made. The manipulator may put pressure suggesting that the victim is being irrational, silly, or unreasonable themselves. This part of the process can cause the victim to begin to question their sense of reality. They begin to lose their healthy sense of perspective and what their gut is telling them. The manipulator may even turn the situation around to blame the victim or question their motives if they do not initially agree to the placed demand. Confusion is a big part of this process. Number 4. Threats. Threatening the victim. This is the part of the process where the manipulator is threatening to do or not do something to cause unhappiness, discomfort, or pain for the victim. If you don't do this, then I will do this. They create a situation where the victim can be responsible for the promised negative outcome if they do not comply. Number 5. Victim compliance. The victim gives in, either quickly or slowly through a process of increasing self-doubt. They comply with the demand of the manipulator, often causing feelings of anxiety, guilt, fear, anger, or resentment. Number 6. Repetition. The manipulator gets their way and subsides temporarily until the next demand of what they want comes up. The frequency of these behaviors and tendencies vary in all relationships involving emotional blackmail. Regardless of the consistency of these behaviors, it has a negative and toxic effect on the relationship and on the victim. Now the cycle is in place and the foundation is set for this pattern to continue. So how do we spot this? Rather than go through this whole chapter, I'm just going to list off some of the most common that I'm sure you've heard before and will recognize immediately. Someone engaging in emotional blackmail will do things like telling you that you're crazy for questioning them, controlling what you do, constantly putting blame on others for their behaviors, rationalizing their unreasonable behaviors and requests, intimidate you until you do what they want, blame you for something that you didn't do so that you feel you have to earn their affection, accuse you of doing something you didn't do, threaten to harm either you or themselves. I'm sure at some point in your life you've dealt with all of them, but then how do we know if we actually are the victim? Victims of emotional blackmail typically feel insecure, unvalued, and unworthy. They often struggle with low self-esteem and doubt their own needs. So it's no surprise when we go over this list that we're more vulnerable to being manipulated. This includes approval-seeking, people-pleasing, people with extreme compassion and empathy, people with the tendency to take blame, people with the tendency to feel pity for others, people who try to avoid conflict, people with self-doubt and low self-esteem. The stress of being in a relationship involving emotional blackmail can take a toll emotionally and physically on the victim. It compromises the victim's sense of integrity and self-esteem. It causes the victims to question their own sense of reality. It leads to negative and distorted thinking about themselves and the relationship. Victims of emotional blackmail often end up being isolated, experiencing extreme loneliness. It impacts an overall sense of well-being and contributes to anxiety and depression. I, for one, can vouch for this as I remember being in a really toxic relationship with my ex. There was just so much I would do for her that I can't believe I did looking back. We were childhood sweethearts, so it was over 10 years long. I remember this one time she manipulated me into going to her brother's house for family parties. And don't get me wrong, I love parties. Or her family for that matter. But they had 3 dogs. Now I love dogs, but I am severely allergic to them. Like, I don't even have to see a dog at your house. If I walk into your house, my throat will clog up and I will itch. But she would always tell me, you have to come to my family party if you care. Everyone else is bringing their significant other. This one time in particular, I had to go to the hospital right after the family party because I simply couldn't breathe. And the kicker, she was almost annoyed that we had to spend hours at the hospital. Now this story is pretty embarrassing, but what's more embarrassing is, I did that so many times. That wasn't even the one and only time. I did this every time just because I had this belief that a good boyfriend will want to make his girlfriend happy. And clearly she abused it. Long story short, when we broke up, I was a shell of a man if I was being completely honest. I was totally emasculated by the end of it. I really didn't even know who I was anymore. I was a super confident guy, but over the years of compromise, it took a toll on me mentally. So how do we spot a blackmailer? Well, the red flags are in the personality. Sadly, these all sound like my ex-girlfriends. These are the people who say things like, if I ever see another girl look at you, I will kill her. If you ever stop loving me, I will kill myself. I'm taking this vacation with or without you. How can you say you love me and still be friends with them? I've already discussed this with our pastor, therapist, friends, family, and they agree that you're being unreasonable. A little side note here, Susan makes an interesting take on doctors, saying that we shouldn't just blindly trust them, because they are people just like everyone else. And that goes with all the other things mentioned. Of course, her friends and family will agree with her. They are biased, but that doesn't mean it's right. Okay, now we figured out what it is, what it looks like. Now the moment you've been waiting for. How do we solve this? To be blunt, the change comes from you. I know you hate to hear that, but let's be honest. Those manipulators probably aren't going to change. What we can control is how we react to people. So I could blame my ex for the dog incident, of course. But the truth is, it's still my fault. I could have stood up and said no. That makes no sense. I might die trying to impress your family and trying to live up to your standards. Susan suggests you start with 15 minutes a day with a contract, power statement, and self-affirming phrases. Contract. You write to yourself that you're an adult with options, and that you're going to stand up for your rights and for fair treatment. Every day you read it and sign it. So this will sound like, I move in silence, recognize myself as an adult with options and choices, and I commit myself to the process of actively getting emotional blackmail out of my relationships and out of my life. In order to reach that goal, I make the following promises. I promise myself that I am no longer willing to let fear, obligation, and guilt control my decisions. I promise myself that I will learn the strategies in this book and that I will put them into practice in my life. I promise myself that if I regress, fail, or fall into old patterns, I will not use slip-ups as an excuse to stop trying. I recognize that failure is not failure if you use it as a way to learn. I promise to take good care of myself during this process. I promise that I will acknowledge myself for taking positive steps, no matter how small they are. And then you're going to sign it, and then you're going to date it. A power statement is something like this. Victims always indirectly tell them that they can't stand or take their blackmailer's pressure. Instead, you will repeat, I can stand it. Self-affirming phrases. These are empowering new phrases that you will repeat to yourself in order to change your beliefs. Whenever you recognize that you are being manipulated, establish an SOS before responding to a demand. Stop. I need time to think about it. Take distance from the blackmailer when you feel pressured. Observe. Take note of what's happening, one's own reaction, thoughts, emotions, and triggers. And strategize. Analyze the demands and the potential impact of complying. Strategize about your response. Consider what you need and explore alternative options, then follow through. Finally, keep in mind that sorry isn't enough. Once you start standing up for yourself and your beliefs, many blackmailers will pretend to go along with the new assertive you, but they will then get back to their old selves. Instead of relying on words, monitor their behavior for actual change. Keep in mind that some relationships will improve as you empower yourself, but some partners cannot accept you as a healthy human being, and you must be ready to let go of those relationships. And let's be honest, those weren't really good to begin with anyways. We have 3 choices. We can accept things as they are, we can negotiate for a healthier relationship, or we can end the relationship. Don't be afraid to let go of bad relationships. There's never the right time to break up. The thought of a bad breakup is scary, but the thought of wasting time in a toxic relationship should scare you more. And that's all for today. I hope this helped. If you got value from this video, like it. If you have any interesting comments, comment down below. And if you want more videos like this, subscribe and hit that notification bell. If you did feel like supporting this channel in a huge way, there is a link down below to buy me a cup of coffee, which I would love because that's the fuel I use for these late nights till 4 a.m. working on content for you. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Let's continue to move in silence.